Hello, welcome to the post-mortem review of our game Morph. My name is Robert Mulcahy, and I have been the team lead and lead gameplay design for this project. Morph is a third-person puzzle platforming game where the player takes control of a shape-shifting girl named Athanasia. Using her various transformations, the player guides her through levels full of puzzles and environmental dangers. When we started developing our original concepts, we decided to try for a game that wouldn't involve combat in any traditional sense. The environment would provide the challenges and hazards for the player instead of a hostile AI. We drew inspiration from Super Mario 64's hat power-ups and the original Prince of Persia's level design.
Hello and welcome to our post-mortem review for our game Morph. My name is Tim Lester and I have been the lead story writer, the designer of level 4, and the voice actor for the character Halo for this project. The original story is about a sacrifice where every 100 years a girl is born with special abilities, not unlike Buffy the Vampire Slayer, except this time she has the ability to transform her body into different states. When each of these girls reach the age of 18, they are left on a mysterious island to be sacrificed to the gods. Our story focuses on one of these girls named Athanasia, who arrives on the island and needs to use her abilities to survive, explore, and conquer the perils of the island. Athanasia knows the stories about the island and decides that she needs to break the cycle. The only way to do this is to find a mysterious artifact known as the Kex. The story took quite the change from the original version, which was to stretch out over the 9 levels that we originally planned. The idea was to have the levels become continually odd and unorthodox, similar to how level 4, the departure, became. The idea was to have the player question if what they were seeing and experiencing was real or not. The downside to this is that the mind trip was initially planned and hoped for with the game, and the ending was not as well developed. Throughout the early days of development, we decided that we needed to integrate and use the story as a mechanic of player direction in order to add immersion. We decided that having a narrator-type entity to help push the story along was the best course. The narrator was originally envisioned to have a Q from Star Trek The Next Generation type of mentality and attitude. Though this was cut, the story still developed smoothly as we decided to give Athanasia an internal monologue, which helps to explain the story and gives the player a direction on what they have to do.
Cave looks almost man-made. There are 2 paths to choose from. Both are nearly identical, so I guess I'll pick one and try my luck.
Hello, my name is Ryan Grisafi, and I have been the lead scripter as well as scaleform designer for the project, our game Morph. I just want to go over the mechanics of what's been implemented into the game so far. Athanasia has 3 transformation mechanics, not including her default state. There is the tiny form, which shrinks her down, heavy form, which increases her density, and the liquid form, which gives her water jets in which she can use to temporarily fly or to shoot with. The tiny form is used to get by small areas that Athanasia wouldn't fit through normally, such as small holes and even slip under dangerous spike traps. Windy areas that would normally blow Athanasia away would have an increased effect on her if she is in tiny form, which can mean certain death or access to a new area. So, tiny form was the first form that we implemented into the game because it seemed the easiest. Just shrink the player down and size, and they can fit through small areas, right? Well, once we did that, we've had countless complaints about the camera with testers. The camera and the players are in a cramped area, which leads to various odd behaviors. To fix this, we added a volume inside the small areas that would trigger a first-person perspective while the player is in them. No longer did we need to worry about a floating third-person camera going through walls or giving the player a terrible view. Plus, it had a neat immersive effect of actually feeling small. The heavy form was the second form that we implemented. It was created to interact with buttons that require a lot of weight to push down, which we have dubbed heavy buttons, ignoring the blowback effect from strong winds and breaking through weak floors. Pulling this form off was not as easy as we originally anticipated. because instead of the form performing the actions, it was the levels performing the actions in reaction to the heavy form. The strong winds, weak floors, and heavy buttons have to all be prepared to react to when a player is in heavy form and is touching them. This meant we either had to make our own scripts for these placeable objects or resort to setting up Kismet webs that included custom Kismet nodes of our own for every time we wanted to use them. And finally, we have the liquid form, which was the last one that we implemented and by far the hardest one to make. Liquid form wasn't originally the third transformation. Instead, we had a bouncy form, which made the player actually like rubbery and allowed the player to jump high and reflect projectiles shot. But we had quite a few comments that came in on our game design perspective that at that point was completely reliant on the environment acting on the player with no ability for the player to instead and act on the environment, which tends to lead to player boredom. So we changed bouncy form to liquid, which kept the same high jump, but instead of rejecting projectiles from turrets, it added a water blasting ability to shoot them down and hit out of reach buttons, giving the player an ability to act on the environment with. Unfortunately, we ran into several problems with the high jumping. We needed it to jump high, but to get that much height, it shot the player up at violently uncontrollable speeds. The high jump was replaced with the ability to temporarily fly with water jets. It would gently float the player up, but bring them to the height of Bouncy Form's original jump was supposed to be. And another issue we ran into was the liquid projectile's ability to act on buttons. Since we don't have a weapon class, and the liquid ability is really just an instance hit trace, there was no really clear-cut way to have the projectile apply impulse to meshes. We wound up having to create a placeable button which would react to mouse clicks from a distance. This button created its own set of problems that weren't fixed until very late in the development process.
Alder gave me my heavy ability. I can now make myself really dense. I wonder how that will help me.
My name is Brendan Murphy, and I have been a level designer, programmer, art asset creator, and sound editor for this project. And I'm going to talk about the evolution of the levels of Morph. Morph is 4 levels long. Our original design had called for it to be 9 levels long, with the first 3 levels being tutorial levels. Each level was going to have its own purpose in regards to gameplay and mechanics, but the one thing that we wanted to keep our player aware of throughout every level was that there was no penalty for death. If the player dies, they go back to the last checkpoint and continue from there. There's no lives counter, you don't get points deducted for dying, and there is no game over until the game is actually over, or if you quit. Our first level in the final game starts off slow. It teaches the player about the tiny transformation and common elements in the game, such as pressing buttons, small areas, and spikes. These are all shown in a relatively safe environment. This is the first time that we want the player to find out that nothing really bad happens when you die, so it's fine to keep trying over and over and over again if you keep failing. The second level introduces the player to the liquid transformation and builds off of the knowledge gained from the first level, such as that there are buttons that need to be pressed, but some are out of reach, so you need to find a new way to get them pressed. There's also new ways to use tiny form and new traps that can kill you. This level is extremely dangerous, and we really wanted to introduce all of the environmental dangers in this level. The third level introduces the player to the final form, which is heavy form. This builds even further on everything the player has learned, using all 3 forms within an environment that is more of a puzzle than anything overly dangerous. I don't actually think there is a way to die in level 3. We didn't really feel that our game needed to try and kill the player in every level, so in the original scheme of things, there would have been levels that would have just been very long puzzles. Finally, the 4th level challenges the player to use all the forms that they've learned, as well as all the knowledge that they've gained in the previous 3 levels. This level is a long environmental puzzle, which requires the player to be very aware of their surroundings in order to solve the puzzle. And then the whole thing culminates in a very intricate cutscene that ties up the whole story. Originally, we had no idea that our time was so limited, or that it was going to take so long to produce each level. The first 3 levels were intended to be our original tutorial levels, showing the player how each transformation would work and gradually introducing a number of mechanics. We realized in the second month of development that 9 levels, an intended 45 minutes to an hour of gameplay, was just way too much for us to handle, and we cut that right out, as well as cutting out a number of mechanics, some of which that we had already programmed assets for. This is also the reason why we condensed the story, and why it might leave players with a little bit more than a few questions by the end cutscene.
As stated before, we've had to downsize a lot. Our ideas for the game were just too big for the amount of time we were given to develop the game, even though we thought we were aiming small. We planned on having 9 levels, but we ended up chopping it down to 4 levels total. And we cut out 3 game objects altogether that we were going to use to increase the difficulty as the game progressed. Those were fire spouts, which would have been geysers of flame that would erupt in patterns that the player would have to decipher to move through. Fire crystals, which would act as turrets throwing fireballs at the player, and boulders, which would boulder you.
There's a lot of wind coming down this tunnel. I can't make it out of here like this. Maybe if I...
A lot of our time was spent polishing on the levels we did have and tweaking the mechanics. The first and probably the most prominent issue we had was with the testers getting lost in our levels. The levels are all linear, but we made it difficult to see the direct path, forcing the player to explore a bit. The fact that our testers were getting lost in these areas was really unexpected to us. So we've added several things to help them out. We've added subtitles, voiceovers, and magic torches that would breadcrumb the player from start to the end. For every new item we added into the game for player guidance, we felt like we were overdoing it, but feedback always returned the same. Players still got lost. Eventually, the feedback finally changed its tune. Testers felt that we were holding their hands too much and wanted less of the magic torches, which was something we were very glad to hear. With the voiceovers combined with the subtitles, the players were able to understand what to do and where to go on their own, solving the levels the way we originally intended. It was then a matter of condensing the story into 3 levels that we had already built, and a 4th level that would tie up the story and be the ultimate puzzle ending. While the 4th level isn't as completely rounded as we would have liked, we started to run out of time to add everything into it and decided to cut our losses and make a mad dash for the finish line. Despite our time constraints, we feel like we've developed a well-rounded and entertaining experience. To tell it true, we were really fortunate to have a group that worked so well together. There were some really early issues with working around people's work schedules, as well as some issues with unifying the core design concepts and intentions, but we worked through it with ease. In the end, every member of the team pulled their own weight, and we were gifted to have some great outside assistance as well.